Russian forces continue a full-scale assault on Ukraine as its military attacks the country from the north, east and south. The Ukrainian President Zelensky has said that 137 Ukrainian citizens, both soldiers and civilians, died on Thursday when Russia began its attack. Russians have also seized control of the Chernobyl complex, the site of the world's worst nuclear disaster.
Попередніми даними, на жаль, ми втратили за сьогодні вже 137 наших героїв, наших громадян. З них 10 офіцерів. Поранено 316.
Now, U.S. President Joe Biden on Thursday unveiled harsh new sanctions on Russia meant to punish the country for its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, calling out President Vladimir Putin for his aggression, even as he acknowledged it would take time for the new measures to alter Putin's behavior.
Putin declared his war within moments. Putin is the aggressor. Putin chose this war. And now he and his country will bear the consequences. Today, I'm authorizing additional strong sanctions and new limitations on what can be exported to Russia. This is going to impose severe cost on the Russian economy, both immediately and over time. Our forces are not and will not be engaged in the conflict with Russia in Ukraine. Our forces are not going to Europe to fight in Ukraine, but to defend our NATO allies and reassure those allies in the East.
Now, the White House has said the latest round of robust sanctions it imposed on Russia for its invasion of Ukraine will ensure that Putin's decision will be a strategic failure. Deputy National Security Advisor Dalip Singh said the sanctions imposed by the administration are without question the most consequential ever levied on Russia and arguably the most consequential ever levied in history.
The sanctions measures we imposed today, I think without question, were the most consequential ever levied on Russia and arguably the most consequential ever levied in history, if you look at the aggregate financial impact on Russia. So that's why we took the measures that we did. And we did so because we could move in lockstep with our allies and partners.
And Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida announced additional sanctions on Friday after attending a meeting with G7 leaders to discuss Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Now, back in Russia, there are reports of protests against a Ukrainian invasion. There were gatherings of people in St. Petersburg protesting the invasion. In fact, protests in other cities were also reported. Just before the attack on Ukraine, President Zelensky had made a passionate and direct appeal to people of Russia to reject the attack. There are reports that hundreds have been held by the police. Now, Prime Minister Narendra Modi dialed the Russian President Vladimir Putin yesterday, appealing for an immediate end to the violence in Ukraine. The conversation came hours after Ukraine's urgent appeal to India for intervention. A statement from the Prime Minister's office said Prime Minister Modi called for concerted efforts from all sides to return to the path of diplomatic negotiations and dialogue. He reiterated his long-standing conviction that the difference between Russia and the NATO group can only be resolved through honest and sincere dialogue. The statement read, President Putin had briefed Prime Minister Modi about the recent developments regarding Ukraine. Now, with the Ukrainian airspace closed, India said it was sending government teams to the land borders of Ukraine to help evacuate Indians in need of assistance. Foreign Secretary Harsh Vardhan Shringla said that the topmost priority of the government is the safety of Indians in Ukraine.
The Prime Minister has conveyed at the CCS meeting that the topmost priority of the government is the safety and security of Indian nationals, including Indian students, and their evacuation from Ukraine. और जो सेफ रूट्स हैं जैसे आपने कहा वो भी आइडेंटिफाई हो गए. मैंने आपको बताया था कि बाय रोड अगर कीव से आपको जाना हो तो पोलैंड के लिए 9 घंटे का रास्ता है और रोमानिया के लिए करीब 12 घंटे का रास्ता है. तो वो रास्ता भी मैप आउट हो गया है.
With Russia invading Ukraine, India today called for an immediate de-escalation while speaking at an emergency session of the United Nations Security Council.
We call for restraint on all sides. the immediate priority is de-escalation of tensions. We are convinced that this issue can only be resolved through diplomatic dialogue. We need to give space to the recent initiatives undertaken by parties which seek to diffuse tensions.
India also said it is working on evacuating over 20,000 Indian nationals stuck in Ukraine.
I underline once again that more than 20,000 Indian nationals, including students, are located in different parts of Ukraine, including in its border areas. We are facilitating the return of all Indian nationals, including students, as may be required.
The Indian Embassy in Ukraine, in a series of advisories and a message from the ambassador Partha Satpathy, said Ukrainian airspace is closed. Alternative arrangements are being made for the evacuation of Indian nationals. Please carry your passports and necessary documents on you at all times. Those stranded in Kyiv, try and stay with friends and colleagues in Kyiv. The government of India is working on mission mode to find a solution. In case you are in an area where there are air raids, Google Maps has a list of nearby bomb shelters. Meanwhile, in India, Kerala Chief Minister Pinarayi Vijayan urged the centre to intensify its evacuation measures and also wrote a letter to External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar flagging that at least 2,320 students from Kerala are in Ukraine. At the Ministry of External Affairs, the control room has been expanded and made operational 24/7.
വിമാനമാർഗം അവിടെ നിന്ന് ഇന്ത്യക്കാരെ തിരികെ എത്തിക്കാനുള്ള നടപടികൾ റദ്ദ് ചെയ്തിരിക്കുകയാണ്. ബദൽ സംവിധാനങ്ങൾ ഏർപ്പെടുത്താനുള്ള അടിയന്തരമായിട്ടുള്ള നടപടികൾ ആസൂത്രണം ചെയ്തുകൊണ്ടിരിക്കുകയാണ്. ഈ ദൗത്യത്തിൽ ഇന്ത്യയുടെ എംബസിയെ സഹായിക്കാനായിട്ട് കൂടുതൽ നയതന്ത്ര ഉദ്യോഗസ്ഥന്മാരെ ആ മേഖലയിലേക്ക് അയക്കാനും കേന്ദ്ര സർക്കാർ വിദേശകാര്യ മന്ത്രാലയം തീരുമാനമെടുത്തിട്ടുണ്ട്.
India is one of the few countries which haven't directly criticized Russia's decision to send troops across the Ukraine border and has been calling for de-escalation on both sides.
India has so far adopted a diplomatic approach to the Russia-Ukraine conflict, but with thousands of Indians still stuck in Ukraine, it now also has a massive evacuation operation before it, which has become all the more challenging due to the closure of the airspace. Bureau report for NDTV.
Now, US President Joe Biden announced tougher sanctions against Russia, and in that press conference that he held, he was also asked about India's stand on Russia. Here's what he said.
Sir, India, which is a major defense partner of the United States, is India fully with you on the issue of Ukraine and Russia?
We're in consultation with India today. We haven't resolved that completely.
Welcome back. Breaking news coming in now. The CBI has arrested a former NSE executive, Anand Subramanian. The CBI, which is probing certain irregularities at the National Stock Exchange, had earlier questioned Anand Subramanian, the former group operating officer. Mr. Subramanian was appointed as a chief strategic advisor and promoted as a group chief operating officer by Chitra Ramakrishna, the former managing director and chief executive officer of NSE. A recent SEBI investigation had brought to light a bizarre facet of corporate misgovernance at the country's top boss, that Ramakrishna allegedly collaborated with an unknown yogi in the running of the exchange. Well, let's go across to Arvind now for more. And Arvind, this is a massive, story. It caused so much outrage when these, issues came to light. The fact that there was some faceless yogi who was privy to a lot of information regarding the NSE, and now the arrest of Anand Subramanian. Give us the details.
Yeah, Gadgi, the Central Bureau of Investigation late last night has arrested Anand Subramanian in the alleged stock market exchange case. So in 2018, the Central Bureau of Investigation has registered a case over allegations in the stock market. So on 2 counts, the Central Bureau of Investigation has registered the case. One, a co-location scam. That is, some of the brokers, the stock market brokers, were given preferred access whereby they were allowed to set up servers, their stock exchange servers, in the same location where NSE servers were there. So thereby allowing them to set up the servers in the same location where NSE servers were there, thereby they were given a preferential access to the stock market. So that these brokers, including OPG Securities, they were allowed to book and transact with the shares, even with a preferred timeline ahead of all other stock market exchanges, so that these brokers gained made massive gains in the stock market. So that's where based on this allegation, the Central Bureau of Investigation registered a case in 2018. So subsequently, in the SEBI report also, the SEBI came up with several irregularities during the stint of Chitra Ramakrishna, who was the then chief of NSE. So Chitra Ramakrishna, during that particular SEBI probe, it came to light that Chitra Ramakrishna appointed Anand Subramaniam as the group operating officer based on the direction of a faceless yogi. So that was also brought to the public. So when the Central Bureau of Investigation looked into the affairs of Chitra Ramakrishna during her tenure in NSE, they also got to know that this particular Anand Subramanian was also appointed as the group operating officer, thereby with various violations of the regulations and rules of the NSE. And that's why the agency, after second time questioning him yesterday, has decided to arrest him. So he was arrested late last night in Chennai, and what we are being told is that he will be taken to the Delhi for further questioning, and the agency is also expected to question Chitra Ramakrishna in the coming days.
All right, Arvind, thanks so much for joining us. So with the latest there, the CBI arrests Anand Subramanian. Those are the latest developments coming in on that particular story. But let's now return to the latest from Russia and Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Russian forces continue their full-scale assault on Ukraine as its military attacks the country from the north, east and south. Ukrainian President Zelensky says 137 Ukrainian citizens, both soldiers and civilians, died on the first day of the attack on Thursday. Russians have also seized control of the Chernobyl complex, the site of the world's worst nuclear disaster. Ukraine's army is trying to repel a full-scale Russian invasion with fierce battles taking place close to the capital, Kyiv. That's the latest that we're hearing, that fighting is raging at an airfield on the outskirts of the city, and it could become a springboard for the Russian army into Kyiv if its troops then seize it. Here's what the president had to say.
Попередніми даними, на жаль, ми втратили за сьогодні вже 137 наших героїв, наших громадян. З них 10 офіцерів. Поранено 316.
Now, the U.S. has announced fresh sanctions on Russia, and the White House says these latest rounds of sanctions imposed on Russia for its invasion of Ukraine will ensure that Russian President Vladimir Putin's decision will be a strategic failure. The Deputy National Security Advisor, Dalip Singh, said the sanctions imposed by the administration on Thursday are without question the most consequential ever levied on Russia.
The sanctions measures we imposed today, I think without question, were the most consequential ever levied on Russia, and arguably the most consequential ever levied in history, if you look at the aggregate financial impact on Russia. So that's why we took the measures that we did. And we did so because we could move in lockstep with our allies and partners.
And Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida announced additional sanctions on Friday after attending a meeting with G7 leaders to discuss Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Meanwhile, there are reports of protests in Russia against Ukrainian invasion. There was a gathering of people in St. Petersburg and in Moscow as well, protesting the invasion. Just before the attack on Ukraine, President Zelensky had made a passionate, dramatic and direct appeal to the people of Russia to reject the attack. There are reports that the police in Russia have arrested hundreds of people in anti-war protests staged in cities across the country. Welcome back. Russian forces continue their full-scale assault on Ukraine as its military attacks the country from the north, east and south. Today is day 2. There's fierce fighting being reported from across the country and reports of big blasts heard in Kyiv. Let's go across to Jyoti Hair, a reporter from Kyiv. Thank you so much, Jyoti, for joining us this morning. What's the latest you can share with us?
Hi, good morning. So it's around 6 o'clock in the morning here now, and about 45 minutes ago, we heard 3 big blasts. And now we're hearing from Ukrainian officials that a plane was shot down, but this is not confirmed yet. However, I can confirm there was two very large blasts and then sort of a smaller blast. It seemed to be coming in closer than yesterday. I didn't actually see anything in the air today. Unlike yesterday, we saw huge sort of explosions and smoke. But there were reports of people seeing explosions over the Dnieper River. So that happened about an hour, 45 minutes to an hour ago. So I can't confirm exactly, but the Ukrainian officials are saying that that a jet was shot down.
And what is the situation in the city? Yesterday we saw, lots of visuals of people fleeing cities and traffic jams and vehicles trying to move out. But for the moment, also there are reports that people have been asked to go into bomb shelters, etc. If you could share that with us.
Sure. So definitely yesterday morning at 9 o'clock, it was impossible to get out of the city for the people that were trying to get out. And then we saw sort of later into the day, and especially I went into the grocery stores around 8, 9 o'clock in the evening, and you could see that the shelves were bare. There was no bread. Lots of dry stuff was gone. There was, I would say, like 70% of the dry stuff was off the shelves. Huge lines more. So in the morning we had the lines, and then in the evening we had the lines. So in the morning you had the people that woke up, heard what was happening, tried to flee, tried to stock up. And then in the evening you had those people that still weren't sure what was happening in the morning, hitting the stores, hitting the banks, bank machines, huge lineups in the evening. Yesterday evening, I also saw people in the underground metros treating that as a bomb shelter and sheltering there. So a lot of confusion still. Right now it's early, so you can see the streets behind me. They're pretty much clear. We're going to see what happens in a couple of hours. I mean, clearly there's something happening right now, but as in terms of the people, the citizens, what they're planning on doing today, as you know, the Ukrainian president did ask the Ukrainian people to defend themselves, to pick up arms, to sign up if they can. So yesterday I didn't see a lot of, people out and armed citizens, but we'll see what happens here in a couple of hours. And also the latest was that the mayor himself, the mayor of Kyiv, has said that he will be picking up arms to defend the city. So that's the latest right now.
Right. One can't imagine the situation. So you actually have husbands and fathers, just picking up arms and going off to defend the city, the country. What does it mean when they've been asked to pick up arms? Do they then have to go and report somewhere? If you could just explain a little more, and you can understand a lot of anxious Indian families also, wanting to know the latest from there, given that their loved ones, many students are there in Ukraine right now.
Definitely a scary situation. I mean, it's been a scary situation here for a while, but to hear actual government officials, the president of the country, tell citizens to pick up arms, I mean, that's just scary within itself. So what does that mean? Either citizens can sign up, reservists can go and sign up for the army and receive arms from the military. But also, as of late, there were more arms sales in Ukraine. And previously, private citizens could carry arms, but not in public. But now, private citizens with arms are allowed to carry them in public. So that's a huge change. So one of two ways, but either way, Ukrainian citizens can now arm themselves and walk the streets with those arms.
And the latest report that we're seeing from, many of the news agencies is about efforts by Russian forces to actually surround Kyiv.
That's exactly what I'm hearing. That is exactly what I'm hearing. Even as close as I would say about, let's give it a drive time, about 35 minutes out, there's an airport, not a civilian airport, but apparently that has been taken over by Russian troops, and very quietly. There weren't, big bangs and, shooting. It seemed to have been taken over quietly without too much Ukrainian resistance. And so and exactly as you say, it appears that since yesterday, forces from Belarus were getting closer to Kyiv, and it looks like today the possibility of them actually getting into Kyiv city proper is sounding closer and closer.
And Jyoti, what is the information like there right now? Are you receiving information? Is the internet working? Are all the news sites working over there? Also, we do know there's a lot of pride in Ukraine, and everyone said that they'll defend themselves. The president has said that Ukraine will fight back in his last message that he made just before President Putin announced the invasion. But is there a sense that some peace could be brokered? That clearly Russia wants to, control Ukraine. They want a change of regime there. Is there any sort of, are you hearing any sort of efforts on that front, or right now it's that they're going to fight and defend Ukraine?
Well, Ukraine has officially cut off diplomatic ties with Russia. So the chances of peace being brokered at this point are very slim. And I mean, we've been leading up to this point for a very long time, but in the past 3 to 4 weeks, more efforts from around the world have been made to broker this peace. And clearly it hasn't made any sort of effect. So right now, from what we understand from President Putin, it doesn't look like he's very interested in any kind of peace brokering. He has a specific vision for Ukraine, for Kyiv, and from what we can see, it's going like he's planned.
Right. There are reports that the French president says he's ready to broker a ceasefire. We'll wait to hear more, on that front. Have you heard also that there have been protests in Russia against this Ukraine invasion? There have been arrests as well, protests in St. Petersburg and Moscow.
Yeah, there's been a lot of that. And it's actually rather surprising, but also we have to understand there's such really close ties between the Ukrainian people, the Russian people, their relatives, friends, especially people living on the borders. I mean, for people living on the borders, crossing the border to visit family and friends is the same as crossing, going from one city to another. So there's a lot of kinship. So between the people of Ukraine and Russia, there's a bond, and they're just like the Ukrainian people are shocked and in disbelief that this is actually happening. That same shock and disbelief is over in Russia. So yeah, there are protests there. We've also seen violence there against those protesters. When the Russian government has a plan, we know that dissidents are not so peacefully treated. So yeah, we're seeing a lot of that there as well. But unfortunately, at this point, I'm not sure what protests can possibly do when we now have Russian troops so close to Kyiv.
All right, Jyoti, thank you so much for speaking to NDTV, and do stay safe there. Thanks so much for joining us. Now, NDTV has also been speaking to a Voice of America journalist, Heather Murdoch. We spoke to her when she was in eastern Ukraine, and yesterday, as the invasion began, she's reporting from the war zone, and she was on the road from Kharkiv to capital Kyiv. Here's a report that she sent us.
We're a couple hundred miles outside of Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine, and we're driving through an area that was clearly an active battle zone very shortly before we got here, and we understand that Russian forces are right behind us, not specifically chasing us, but heading towards Kyiv. We've seen so far what appeared to be a bus on fire, a building on fire, and other military truck that appeared to be abandoned, some other military trucks that have personnel waiting outside, appearing to be unsure what to do next. The roads are almost empty. Businesses are all closed, although right now we are in the countryside, and almost no people are on the streets. We are hoping to get to Kyiv safely, but right now in Ukraine it is not sure where one can go to be safe or what will happen next after a very dramatic day, starting with bombs in the morning and the movement of Russian troops into the country from many different sides. Heather Murdoch, VOA News, outside of Kyiv in Ukraine.